Today we are
Nice,
going
man.
to learn something that we are going to use which has a lot of uses. Basically, uh, any code that's bigger than a beginner child level code, any professional code for anything at all, is going to use what we are studying today. What we covered in today's class, it's going to be part of every possible code that you'll ever see in Python for anything, for hacking, for making games, for work, for anything. But
Nice.
what we study today is part of every single professional Python code. Every code is incomplete without it.
The import function.
The functions.
Hehe.
So today we are going to study functions. Let's start the class, I guess, since it's been 10 minutes into the class. So today we are going to study functions. Functions. Can anybody quickly tell me what do you think functions are? When you hear the word function, what do you think it means? What do you think it will do?
I think it's part of the code which can be requested uh, to be, again and again, to be used again and again later in the code.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly what functions are. Functions are code blocks that can be reused without exact duplication. We saw in last class when we were studying dictionaries that you can create dictionary structures, and dictionaries are these structures for storing certain types of data. You can create one dictionary, then you can reuse the same structure within it. You can make dictionaries within dictionaries, and the purpose of dictionaries was so that you don't have to write the exact same information 5 times if you need to store 5 different type of variables with certain modified versions, certain different aspects of them. So dictionaries were helping us reuse the storage of data. Functions are the calculation version of that duplication. So if we need to do certain calculations on certain variables, if we want to do it once, we can just write 1 plus 1 equals 2 and that's it. But if we need to do it 10 times or 500 times, and every time the variable is different, that's where functions come in. Dictionaries were helping us prevent writing, saving a variable in a place 500 times. Functions help us prevent writing an operation, a calculation 500 times. So if we want to do certain calculation, which involves some printing, some multiplications, some additions, then printing the result of something, certain set of calculations, we don't, and we want to do it multiple times, we don't have to write those operations multiple times. Let's just quickly take an example. Let's see what we can do with functions. Let's say I have a variable called x equals 10, another variable y called 20, and another one z which is, let's say, anything 15. I have these three variables. I want to create certain operations using them, certain calculations. So let's suppose my output comes from x plus y, and the result of that multiplied by z. Let's say this is my output. And then I want to print the output. Guys, it's a simple calculation. You have the result on screen.
Sorry, I was muted. Repeat.
That's okay.
This will just give you the result, right?
Result.
Yeah. What
Simple as
if I
that.
want to perform some other calculation? So I can say another output, and this is equal to x times y times z. And then I want to print another output. So these are certain values that I have in XYZ. I'm performing first operation on them and printing them, then I'm performing another operation on them and printing them. But if I want to do the whole thing again, but with different values of x, y, and z, one way of doing that would be to copy this entire thing and then paste it below and change the values of x, y, z as I want. So instead of these values, if I want new values here, I want 2, 9, and let's say 7. So the first two output lines now are the result of the first time I performed this operation, 450 and 3000, and the next ones are the result of the new operations, right? But this is not an elegant way of coding. You see, I wrote a code block, I copied the entire code block, I pasted it again. So this consumes a lot of lines of code. But if I have to do it 500 times, would I copy this code block 500 times and then change values here? That wouldn't be very elegant, would it? So there is another way. And another way of doing this would be functions. The way we write functions in Python are using the keyword by using the keyword def. DEF. It basically means define. Okay? And we call it my awesome function. And then basically you use the keyword def, you write the name of the function. Name of the function is just like name of the variable. It can be anything you want it to be. There are certain restrictions. For example, you cannot start by numbers, I guess. I don't even know what restrictions are there. I generally just use small case letters with underscores to give some names to my functions. Functions take certain inputs, and here we specify the names of those inputs. So let's say I'm calling it variable 1, variable 2, and variable 3. I'm not sure if function definitions have colons. Let's see. And inside my function, I want to do the same thing that I did here. This functionality, I want to provide it inside the function. So what would be the functionality? My output 1 would be variable 1 plus variable 2, and then I enclose them in brackets. By the way, do you have the link to this notebook so you can follow along if you need to copy something, if you need to paste something? Do you have the link to this notebook?
I have, but I can send it to people in the chat.
Perfect. Let's create another variable called output2 for the second functionality. And the second functionality is what? Variable 1 times variable 2 times variable 3. And after that, we want to print the output.
There you go, it's shared on the chat of the Zoom.
Okay. So now this is my function, right? This is the end of my function. All this function does is perform certain calculations, outputs it, performs certain other calculations, outputs it. Let's let's make it a little bit more elegant. Let's say first it prints the inputs. So the inputs are this, this, and this, and we can use here the dot format function to give variable 1, variable 2, and variable 3. So it prints them. After printing them, it prints the outputs. Okay, we can again say print the first operations output is nothing, calculation happens, next line prints this, then again the second operations output is, and nothing, next line prints the output. That's our function. After creating the function, now we can comment out these parts. Well, we don't even need to use XYZ. I'm just keeping them here to show you a cool trick that we can use. So let's just use the first one. For the second one, we'll do something else. Because here right now the values are being overwritten. So since variable names cannot be duplicated in Python line by line when you execute this code, XYZ only has now values 2, 9, and 7 if I didn't comment it. The previous values will be gone. So let's say now I want to call this function. I say my awesome function. I pass it the arguments x, y, and z. And what are the values of x, y, and z right now? 10, 20, and 15.
Sadia, I
Yeah,
cannot see the screen.
you
Sorry.
cannot. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes,
The values 10, 20, and 15 gave us the outputs 450 and 3000, right? Since we are performing the same operations inside this function, when we run this function like this, it should give us the same output. So the first output it gives is 450 and 3000. The cool thing about functions is now here we can say print. Now we are doing cool stuff like reusing the functions. And after that, I can call the same function again. Instead of giving xyz, I can give any values I want for 3 variables. So let's say I'm giving value 2, 4, and 6. And if I run this now, the first time, oh, by the way, if you want to print some line breaks so that there is some separation between your code, you can do this. So there's an empty line between the two now. This is the output of the first time I'm calling the function. The values I gave were 10, 20, and 15. The first output was 450, the second output was 3000. The second time, the values I gave here were 2, 4, and 6. So this is the result of first calculation. This is the result of second calculation. So you can see I can reuse the same function with one line of code instead of having to write originally what we did. Originally, what were we doing? We were doing 3 values x, y, z. We were writing this entire code block to print the same thing on the screen. After that, we were writing the new values again, and we were pasting the exact same thing the second time. It took us how many lines roughly? From line 1 to line 18 to print 2 lines of output code. If you want to see that again, what we can do is comment out this part and instead go back to our original code, which was just this one. Sorry, I included. Okay, so this was our original code, right? Let's see what our original code prints. The original code, when I run it, it prints these 4 lines of output. To print these 4 lines of output, we roughly needed from line 1 to line 18 without even any of the fluff that we added in the function, the extra print statements like this is the input, that is the output, versus when we create a function. Now let's comment out the first part and let's uncomment the function part. With the function, we roughly took from line 20 to 32, but we can do it as many times as we want. We can just create another line and pass on another set of values. We can say this time it is just 1, 3, and 5. We can reuse it as many times as we want. Versus if we had to use the previous method, we would need many more lines of code. And this is just small operations. We only had 4 lines of operations here. If we have longer calculations to do, if we have more things that we want to perform, then this thing would get out of hand very quickly. Do you have any questions about what functions are, or why do we need them, or why are we even creating them in the first place? We'll go into the technical details of them later. I'll explain each part of the function. How do we create them? What things we need? What things can be optional? But do you have any questions so far?
No, all good.
All good? In Python, we can give default values to certain variables. That way, if you don't pass on any value, it takes the default value. So for example, in my function, I could say variable 1 is equal to 1, variable 2 is equal to 1, and variable 3 is equal to 1. What's the benefit of doing this? That way, if my variable 3 is going to remain 1 always, I can just call this function with only 2 parameters, variable 1 and variable 2. And the third one will automatically take the value 1. So let's comment out these parts and see if it really does this. If I just pass x and y, the values that it uses as input are 10, 20, which is the x and y, and the third value is the default value. So in Python, you can give default values to variables. It's not really a great practice because then it becomes a little bit confusing which one you want to use as default. For example, if I don't want to use y as my second variable, if I want to use it as my third variable, then I will have to explicitly specify it here. I will say variable 3 is equal to y. I will have to specify it, otherwise I will run into a problem. By specifying it, now variable 1 is x, which still takes 10 value. Variable 2, there's no variable 2 here. So that takes the default value of 1. Variable 3 is explicitly specified that, okay, y is my variable 3. So that takes the value 20. It's very useful when you have, for example, 10 or 15 variables going on as inputs to a function. So you can put some of them as defaults. So if you have, for example, certain functions that you're going to call 5 times in your code and you have 10 variables as inputs, but for 3 of the times that you're calling it, half of your variables can take default values. If you don't need to change them, if you only need to change some values in some, then giving default values can become very handy and very useful. You can change the values that are changing and you can leave some values at defaults. Make sense? For
Yes.
example, for
I have a
example,
question.
oh, go ahead.
I want to ask that when we're giving the variables as input in the function, so do we have to be careful about the positioning because variable 3 is in the position of y?
Yes. Well, when you are explicitly specifying variable 3 is equal to y, when you're using this equality sign, then it doesn't matter where I place my variable. For example, I could remove the first variable from here and I could put it at the end. I could say variable 1 is equal to x, and it would still take x as variable 1 because I'm explicitly defining it. It would still take the value
Okay.
10 as x because I'm explicitly writing it. So when I write variable 1 equals this, variable 2 equals this, variable 3 equals this, then positioning them doesn't matter. But if I'm not using this equal sign, if I'm just passing x, y, and z, let's see what happens. If I'm copying my function, instead of running it like this, if I am just running it with x, y, and z. So originally I was passing arguments in this order, x, y, and z. So it was taking them as 10 as x, 20 as y, and 15 as z. What happens if I change the order? If instead of x, y, and z, if I make it x, z, and y, the values would totally change. 20 and 15 have interchanged their positions. So now this is your second variable, this is your third variable. So without using the equality sign, the order in which you pass on the values matters. But if you're using the equality sign to specify each variable where it is, where it goes, or which value it takes, then the order does not matter. Does that
Okay.
answer your question?
Yes, yes, got it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Anybody else has a question? Can we use functions inside loops?
Yes, I think so.
Take 5 minutes and try to call these functions inside a for loop where your for loop goes from 15 to 20. Your first value is just your index variable. Your second value is your index variable times 2, and your third variable is your index times 3. I will write it down here as a comment. Call this function inside a for loop with x taking the index variable, y taking the index variable times 2, and z index variable times 3. And your for loop goes from 15 to 20. Take a few minutes, try this in your compiler, let me know your results.
Question.
Yes.
You're defining your function as my awesome function, right?
Yeah.
Don't you have to use the call def
Well, I'm
for
not
definition?
defining it here. I'm just calling it.
Ah,
So
okay.
when I define it, that's here, up here. I say define my awesome function. Define defines the functionality of the function. What it does happens here. This
Okay.
is the, you can say that this is the template for it to know what it's gonna do when it is called. So there is defining and there is calling. Defining specifies what this is going to do. If you just run this part of the code without calling it, you will not see anything on the terminal, even though this says print this, output is this, output is this, because this one does not do anything until called. So defining and calling. Defining specifies what it does when called, and calling actually calls it. And basically, how how would the code run line by line? Since in Python everything happens line by line, so after line 19, when the function comes to 20 and says the keyword def, it understands that this is a function definition. So it only executes line 20, which tells it nothing but name of the function and how many arguments it takes. We have the name of the function as my awesome function and the arguments it takes as variable 1, variable 2, and variable 3. After that, since it's a function definition, the code does not execute any of these lines. The code looks for an untabbed location and goes there. So the first untabbed location is line 29, which is a comment, so it doesn't get executed. Line 30, the first time this function gets called, that's when compiler goes and starts executing it. So the first time I call it, I pass the values x, z, and y. So when it gets called, then the code goes back here and start executing one by one. So it already from this line has x, z, and y as variable 1, variable 2, and variable 3, and it starts the execution from line 21. The first line says print the inputs are this, this, and this. So variable 1 at that time is the value whatever is in x, variable 2 is z, variable 3 is y. So it prints this line, then goes to this line, then goes to this line, so on until the end of the function. And after it finishes line 27, end of the function, then the code goes to line 31. Again, if I uncomment any of these other lines here, for example, all these, how will the code follow the execution? After line 30, the next two are comments, so they don't get executed. Then line 33 gets executed, 34 gets executed, print something on the terminal. When it sees line 35, this is again a function call. So after line 35 gets executed, the code goes to line 21 and starts executing all these because it gets the values of these variables from line 35, but the execution happens here. And after that, it goes to the next line, line 36. Then it goes to line 37. From 37, it takes these values for these variables, again goes back to 21 and executes the function. Is that clear? How the code executes function calls?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So then inside a for loop, okay, we can say here print this is the blank time this function gets called, and the blank we fill it with dot format I. And after the function does its thing, we also print a blank line, or let's say two blank lines. What's happening here now? Line by line. Line 1 gets executed. This is a for loop. It starts from 20 and it ends at, it starts from 15 and ends at 20. Line 2 gets executed, which is just a print statement. Print, this is the blank time this function gets executed, and the blank is filled by I, which is the loop index. So it says this is the 15th time this function gets called because it's taking the values from I. So 15 to 20. It just fills I in the blank. Now this part is the function thing. The function is doing its thing. Whatever we specified in the function definition happens here. And then the next line, line 4 gets executed and just prints two empty lines. The next time The value here is 16. So we see a block that says this is the 16th time this function gets called. The function does its thing on the new values using 16, 16 times 2, and 16 times 3, does its calculation, then again prints the empty lines using this, and that's it. Until the end of the for loop, the function keeps getting called again and again. Any questions so far?
Mm.
How many functions did we call inside this for loop?
One function, 5 or 6 times.
Anyone else?
I think print is also a function,
Yes,
a built-in.
yes. That's where I was coming. Inside this function, we have called a function called print. Notice the syntax. Function name, curly bracket, the arguments that go inside it, and finishing regular brackets. The way we called our function, instead of calling it print, we have given it its own unique name, which is called my awesome function. The same brackets as a function call, arguments inside it, and the ending bracket. And then again, the print function. So this brings us to the topic of built-in Python functions. Functions, the way we create them, we give them their own names, we give them the arguments, we give them their outputs, we define what they do. Python has done our made our life easier by making some of the functions for us, something that we don't have to define. And those are called built-in functions. Print is one of those functions. So if you want to look what built-in functions are there, you can just simply type in Google Python built-in functions W3 schools and it will take you to this page. These are the built-in functions. Print is the one we just saw. This is the syntax, and then it defines some like details about it, which you don't really need to go into the details of. Can anyone give me another example of a built-in function that we have used? A function that we have used without defining. And the hint is it will use the same syntax. There will be function name, there will be these brackets at the beginning, these brackets at the end, and there will be something that goes inside those brackets. This will be the syntax because this is the syntax of a function call. Can you think of any built-in function that we have used?
Is range a function, built-in function?
Yes, range is another built-in function that we just used. It should be somewhere here in our, yes, this is range. And this is the definition of range. Start, stop, and step. These are the arguments that range takes. Some of these arguments are necessary, some of these are optional. For example, you can call range with only start and stop. You don't have to specify step, which is a default argument. By default, it is 1. So here you can see start is this. It has the default value of 0. Stop is a required argument. It doesn't have any default value. And step, the third argument, it's an optional argument. The default value is 1. So start. So this also explains required and optional arguments. When we defined our function here, in our function definition, all three variables are optional because all three of them have certain default values. But if I defined my function like this instead, if I remove the default value from 2, that will become a required argument. A required non-default argument follows default argument. I think variable 2 has to come either in the beginning or in the end because there's certain convention that the required arguments, I guess, have to come at the beginning. Yeah, so any non-default variables have to come at the beginning, and everything that has a default value comes after. That's the syntax of how when you define your own functions. So we will bring it to its previous form for now, but that's the idea. The range function that we used has a start, which has a default value, a stop, which is a required argument, and a step, which is, and again, default has a default value and hence is an optional argument. If you want to see the function definition of range, that's also possible. If you Google the function definition of range, you can see how Python defined it. All the built-in things that went into defining this function, just like we defined our function here, the definition, you can see that for range and for any other built-in Python functions. These are some of the other built-in Python functions. No one remembers the entire list, and no one even uses the entire list. Some are more common than the others. Sometimes we use the absolute function, all, any function. A couple of times I have used, which one of these? I have used the float function. Sometimes I have used the max. Max and min are one of the common functions. This is to find the maximum or minimum of certain values. So if you want to see the example of, for example, the max function, how to use it, let's see how we can use the max function. Let's create another code block after this. I wanted to create a code. Yes. So if I want to say max and then I pass all the arguments 1, 3, 5, 10. What's the maximum of these numbers? 1, 3, 5, 10. 10, of course. Doesn't matter in which order I pass them. I could have made here 4. Now the maximum is not at the end, it's 5. So max basically returns the maximum of these values. What if instead of integers, I passed it Sadia, Vincent, Edu, Zara, and pass it? What will be the output of this function? Try in your compiler, and then let me know.
Just another question though,
Yeah.
unrelated to this. Uh, I was writing the code on my end, and I was getting the same result over and over. So I copied yours and I applied it.
Mm-hmm.
It was the exact same thing as I had written, and it's still not working. And this is the problem that I'm getting. Uh,
You have
give-
some variables in your stored memory that are not changing, so you have to factory reset your compiler. To do that, you will go here in runtime.
oh, runtime, okay.
Yes, and you will click factory reset runtime. It will clear all the variables stored in the memory. And then if you want to run any code block, if it needs to import anything, you have to run the previous code before it. If you want to use a function definition, you have to run the function definition block before the block that calls it. This basically removes everything from the memory. Function definitions, variables, everything.
Gotcha. Let me see if it works now. No, it keeps giving me the same error, trace back.
Then there is some sort of syntax error or something in your code. I will need to take a look at it before I
Oh,
can help.
that's the thing. I copied your code and I applied to it to see if it was working.
That's strange.
Like this is the last one is the code that I'm using, which is your code. and the top one is what is giving me the error.
One sec.
Well, with the least amount of letters in the word,
Could be, not necessarily. It's a funny function, by the way. It's funny to use max and min instead of numbers, using it with letters, alphabets. Are you ready?
It's gonna be based because his name starts with a B. So if you just told us like it can with alphabet, B should be the minimum letter.
Awesome. Yes. Max and min, when you use them with alphabets or strings or letters instead of numbers, they take the alphabetical order. So whatever starts with comes in alphabets first gives you min, and whatever is the last one gives you the max. They sort these names in alphabetical order and then do the min max. Isn't it funny?
so what happens if we write any one of these words is written with small letters?
Oh, that would be interesting. I don't know either. Let's see. So min is giving us Basit for now. Let's see if we write Basit with small b. It still give us the one with capital. Let's see if we write just Asit. Wow, that is strange. That is really strange. Because even though we have something starting with the letter A, it's in small case, it's not taking it. Okay, what happens if I make it capital? Yeah, capital, it's
Mm,
taking it as min. That is really
okay.
funny.
So it's giving preference to capital
To
letter
capital
first.
letters. It likes capital letters. I hope that was fun. Now, about today's homework. So, the list of built-in Python functions, you don't need to memorize it, but they are helpful in finding certain functionalities. If you just want to see if there is a built-in Python function for something that you're trying to do, if you're trying to find a minimum, if you're trying to find a maximum, if you're trying to concatenate things, if you're trying to convert a decimal number to a binary number, this kind of things. If you just want to see if there is a function that can do this, this list is very helpful. You can see what are the built-in functions and what do they do. Other than that, there's not much use for it. Oh, we also used another built-in function called tuple when we were creating tuples. The homework for this week is something that I did as my first homework. It took me about 2 weeks to get it done. I'm hoping it will take you less because I'm really hoping I taught you for loops better than my teachers taught me. So, this is the homework. On your output, I want you to print these shapes one by one. All this doesn't have to be on one terminal, it's one by one. So, your first homework would be to print this shape using a for loop on your output terminal. The second one would be to print this one using a for loop. The third one would be to print this shape using a for loop, and so forth. All these shapes, you can use one for loop, you can use two, you can use three, you can use one inside other. It's all up to you. But the hint is that you will use for loops for this homework. Any questions?
Why don't you like us?
I
I
don't
love you
know.
guys.
Uh, I'm not sure about that anymore. And
Well,
I'm
love
married or
hurts.
yep.
Trust me, once you print the first one, the rest would become easy. Once you print the first one, the rest would become very, very easy. And this will actually help you develop a mindset of how to think like a programmer, because syntax is very irrelevant in languages. The coding itself, terminal itself, writing the code in a compiler is very, very irrelevant. The important skill to have is how to think about the logic, how to think in your head, how to make your flowcharts on paper, how to basically devise, come up with a logic that, okay, if I do this, then this will happen. Or if I create this, then that will happen. So that sort of thinking is the important part. If you develop the habit of thinking like a programmer, then you can code anything that you want to code. Because even if you're trying to write a very complex machine learning code in the end that uses computer vision or something super complicated and performs some machine learning on it and then does something according to it, that will become very easy for you if you know how to break it down into small code chunks, small code blocks. So no matter how big the code is, no matter how complex the code is, if you're trying to hack someone, if you know the steps, if you know the building blocks, and if you can write your framework on a paper, maybe don't write it on a paper to leave a proof, somewhere where you can erase it, maybe. If you can write it, if you can make your flowcharts, and then you can directly translate each step into the code, you can code anything. The important part is making the logic that enables you to be able to do this. So that's all for today. I hope you will be able to do this homework. If you have any questions, feel free to collaborate with each other. Someone asked in the chat today, where do we submit the homework? You don't. The homework is basically just for you to accomplish the things that we are trying to accomplish in this course. If it works, if it prints the output that you expect it to print, everything's fine. If you're not able to do the homework, then you ask questions in the next class. That's the whole point of this whole class, of these homeworks. So you do the homeworks. If everything works fine, all good. If it doesn't work, then you ask questions in the next class and we discuss about it. For everybody else, the class is over. Edu and I will take a look at a screen for Edu and we will see what's going on with his code.
By the
That's all
way,
for today.
I take bribe
First,
for to get answer for you guys. I
Yes, you
take
can
bribe,
always bribe my husband to make me good food, and I can give you solutions to your homework problems if you get stuck.
and I'm gonna stay because I got the same errors as Edu.
Oh, okay, then we'll take a look at both of your screens. For everybody else, bye.
bye bye.
Bye. Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Bye bye.